This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and I'm joined this week by Aaron Newcomb when we talk to John Maddog Hall about Linux Professional Institute and much more. Up next. Floss Weekly is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Stay in control when it comes to your company's access points and authentication. LastPass makes security simple for your remote workforce. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly, episode 585, recorded Wednesday, July 1st, 2020. Linux Professional Institute. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. Like expired milk, 30% of your customers' data goes bad every year. That's money down the drain. Visit Melissa's developer portal for free access to data quality APIs, demos, and code samples. Freshen up your sour data today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and I'm joined this week by Aaron Newcomb. Aaron, how are you doing right now, and where are you?
I'm doing good. I'm in my study, fighting a little bit of a sinus infection. I apologize in advance for my voice. I can't wait. I need to do the Skype background. Last time I was on, I don't know when that was, like a month ago or something. I showed the front side of my study, right, with all of my goodies on it. And what I've done in Zoom is I've made that my background. So when you're looking at me, you're actually looking at a rear projection of where I normally sit. Because now all you can see is my wife's teaching stuff that she's got in storage while she's, on summer break. So I don't know. We'll see. Eventually we'll get that. Or I'll just move my whole study around so that everything's behind me.
But I don't like that view. So people know we're on Skype, not Zoom now. So it's sort of but it's nice that we have a choice of all these conferencing systems, so we can change things around. My background is a rebuilt one. We were actually not going to be here. We're going to be at a whole new location in Los Angeles instead of Santa Barbara. But we had a big pipe leak in our house, and now there's construction going on everywhere. And and this whole set, which I had broken down completely and packed up to move to the new location, I had to hurriedly set up again. So I don't have the spit filter on this thing, which requires the hands of a safecracker to reassemble. But anyway, I'll break the set immediately after this is over, and we're gonna get ready to go to LA, and maybe you'll see me there. So this is really great. Looking forward to our guest, to do John Maddog Hall of Linux Professional Institute. Do you know, are you familiar with Maddog and his work, Aaron?
I am to a certain degree. I interviewed him actually. So I moved out to California like 10 years ago. Before that, I lived in Ohio and would frequently go to Ohio Linux Fest every year, which was a great show, a great Linux and open source show. And so I believe I interviewed Maddog for my old show I used to do called The Source. And follow him on Facebook. I mean, he's been an advocate for Linux and open source for years, so always an interesting person to talk to about what's going on. So I think this will be a good interview. I'm anxious to see, maybe if his perspective has changed much or how it's changed over the years since I first started talking to him. So it'll be interesting.
Well, I'm eager as well, and we'll get to that shortly. But first, we're going to get this thing paid for with one of our great sponsors. So this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Melissa. Have you ever forgotten to check the date on a carton of milk? Like milk, your customers' data goes bad. In fact, up to 30% of customer data goes bad each year. Melissa makes sure your data is accurate and current so you reach the right customers. Melissa's tools have helped businesses maintain fresh data for over 35 years. You can identify your customers and get to know them, add customer demographic information to your records, such as property and mortgage data, even marital status and social media handles. Melissa will fill in the gaps by adding emails and phone numbers. You can identify current customers and easily allows you to find new prospective customers through Melissa's prospect database. You can verify your addresses, emails, phone numbers, and names in real time. Incorrect data entered by customers, simple human error, or duplicated records makes it easy for bad data to find its way into your system. Melissa can help you verify your data at the point of entry. You can manage and consolidate your records. Melissa's matching and deduplication tools help you uncover, merge, and purge hard-to-find duplicate records for an accurate 360-degree view of your customers. They have flexible deployment options that offer different platforms to suit any preference, size, or budget. With flexible on-premise, web service, secure FTP processing, and software as a service delivery options, you can choose the best way to meet your unique business needs. Melissa also continuously undergoes independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, privacy, and compliance requirements. They have the utmost dedication to your data's security by implementing strong controls and safeguards when processing your data. Over 10,000 businesses trust the address experts. Trust Melissa to be your foundation for data-driven success. Melissa is also supporting communities and qualifying essential workers during COVID-19. See if your organization qualifies for 6 months of free service by applying online. So don't put up with sour customer contact data. Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log on, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. Excellent. So here we are in Floss Weekly, and our guest this week is the great John Maddog Hall. I've not only known him for a long time, but Maddog has been around since floss was still just a dental thing, and long before we called it that. He was with the free software movement. He's been around even longer than that, since 1969, and he runs LPI, the Linux Professional Institute. So welcome, Maddog, to Floss. There he is.
Well, thank you, Doc. Thank you very much. One minor correction. I don't really run the Linux Professional Institute. I'm the board chair, and a guy named Matt Rice is the executive director, and he mostly runs it. I just give guidance every once in a while.
I'm sure it's good. So tell us about it. I mean, you did Linux International back in the day or the decade, and you've been involved in so many things. Tell us about LPI and where it fits in the increasingly vast Linux universe.
Well, about 1995, there was a group of us who started thinking about Linux not just as a technical hobbyist type of operating system or a technical thing, but that it would be really good for business, really good for commercial use. And we created Linux International at that time to try and create some of the things that were necessary for a business. Out of that came a couple of different certification efforts. And LPI was actually created in 1999 by a subset of these people. And it was created as a nonprofit. We also concentrated strictly on certification at the time, even though our charter was actually to promote open source, or what is now called open source, promote open source generally. We felt that creating certifications so that we could help professionals be recognized, and trained properly to be able to maintain people's systems. So one of the other things we did was we concentrated mostly on not the training part, but the certification part. We allowed the training part to be done any way that people wanted to, whether they wanted to be trained on their own, whether they wanted to go to a class, whether they wanted to read books, however they wanted to. They would read the objectives at our site and say, okay, I know how to do that, or I don't know how to do that. And if they didn't know how to do that, they would read more, get another class, or whatever. So that's what LPI does. Particularly up to this point, we have about 160,000 certified people in 180 different countries.
Wow. That's that's a lot. So how does Linux across all these different countries, how does that differ? We tend to think, well, Linux is one thing, but I imagine it's a great deal different in different parts of the world to some degree.
Well, I mean, people are aware of all the different distributions of Linux, and sometimes countries have come up with their own distribution, particularly when in the early days when a lot of the languages of the countries were not supported by the major distributions. However, that's becoming less and less. It's very expensive to maintain a distribution, and so many more of the main distributions, like Ubuntu, like Debian, like Red Hat, maintain a huge language list. So the specific distributions that are specific for a country are tending to disappear. Even things like systems administration is more or less the same. We have LPI in its systems administration tests. We test for both Debian-based distribution and an RPM-based distribution, Red Hat distribution, for example. And we try to make it as general as possible. We do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, we want to be distribution agnostic. And number two, we also want to train people to go into jobs like a call center, where you're not sure what the customer is going to have as a distribution. And most of the time, the problems that customers have are above the distribution line. How do you install a particular aspect of Linux, which is aimed more at the kernel, which goes across distributions. We also have started to get into BSD. We started working with the BSD organizations to come up with a BSD certification. A lot of the BSD people didn't have a certification, particularly one that would be recognized around the world. So we're working with them to create a BSD distribution certification, and we're also working in more now programming. So, for example, recently we created a DevOps certification. Now, with DevOps, it's hard to say how do you do DevOps, because DevOps is different from each company to each company. So we decided to choose the open source DevOps tools and see if people could work with those. And if they worked with those, then the companies could then say, well, this is how we do DevOps in our company. But since you know how to use the tools, you can fit right in.
Hey, John, how has this changed over the years? It seems like, this is my opinion, we went through a period where some of us knew the power of open source, especially for this type of work. But it seems like things have changed, I would say, in the past 5 years, where open source, Linux in particular, those skills have become increasingly more important with the adoption of things like DevOps, cloud technologies. I mean, it seems like Linux powers all that. How do you see the landscape? Has the landscape changed over the last 5 or 10 years for this type of skill set?
So I'm going to take you back a little bit, and we'll go back to something called Sourceforge. And when Sourceforge started up, you might have about 50 different things in Sourceforge listed, and there might be a couple thousand people logging in. And today, if you go out to GitHub, GitLab, and all the other source code repositories and stuff, you find out that there's in the neighborhood of 430,000 different projects and 26 million different people who contribute to them. A lot of these projects are used even in proprietary types of things, loosely coupled, as Richard Stallman used to call it. And so people have to understand that nobody buys a piece of hardware. Nobody buys a piece of software. What they're buying is a solution to a problem. And even if the problem that you're trying to solve is playing a game, that's what you're trying to do. And you really don't care what does it. So people, and the other thing that people realized is that there's only a small number of things that people really get excited about. I was watching TWiT TV earlier, and Leah was on there, salivating over the latest widgets that had come out on iPad. And of course, I'm sitting there going, okay, widgets, and he even mentioned that, all the Android people going, oh, what are you doing? But people, what's underneath of that? Although people want it to be fast, they want it to be small, they want it to be secure, they want it to be all these things. They expect that. That's not something you sell, because if it doesn't do that, you're not going to sell anything at all. So, it's the upper layers that a lot of people like to look at. And people are finding out that they can create that by using open source and free software, and then add some sugars to the top of it.
Yeah. I'm curious to know what the difference might be. I know I run into Linux Academy quite a bit, for example, at conferences and things. And I'm curious to know what the difference might be between LPI and other companies, institutions that are doing kind of similar work.
Okay, well, first of all, Linux Academy is more of a training organization. And you get your training from them, and you may get some certifications. Actually, they're one of our partners also. So you can actually get an LPI certification through Linux Academy. There are other certifications where you're required to do lab work. Our certification is completely online. We use testing centers of you around the world, but you don't have to travel someplace to take a lab type of test. We are continually working on better, faster ways of doing certifications, testing. So, I can't talk futures really, but we keep moving more, and particularly in the age of coronavirus, more to online certifications that are easier and easier for people to do. The certification itself is difficult. I don't encourage people to just say, okay, I'm going to go in and take the test and see what I do. I really encourage people to go to our site to look at the objectives one by one and say to themselves, is this something I really can do? And if not, study it so that when you go to take the test, you're ready for it. We have quite a high failure rate for people that do not do this type of thing.
Interesting. And the other comparison I wanted to ask you about was, you said you had some programming certifications, I believe. There's a lot of boot camps available now. And in fact, some of the companies that I've worked for over the past 5 years have actually I wouldn't say preferred, but it used to be you had to get a degree in CS, for example, right, to get a software engineering job. And the companies that I've worked for have gone more towards boot camps and said, look, if you've passed this boot camp and you can demonstrate your work, we'll hire you. So I know several people that have just gone the boot camp route instead of going to a 4-year degree, CS degree program. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on that. And, do you share that view? And is this something that you're seeing more of a trend in the industry around?
I get this a lot. And you're talking to somebody who started out as an electrical engineer. I was going to Drexel University studying electrical engineering in 1969. And we didn't have computer science back in those days. We had computer black magic. I actually picked up a book on how to program the IBM 1130 in Fortran using punch cards. I read the book, I practiced, I taught myself how to program. I led picked up another book on how to program the PDP-8 mini computer in assembly language. So I taught myself assembly language. I eventually graduated with a degree that was half electrical engineering and half business. And went to work for a company called Aetna Life and Casualty, that at that time was the world's largest commercial user of IBM equipment in the free world. We had a 3-acre computer center. We had 500,000 magnetic tapes in our tape library on site. We automatically ordered 2 of everything that IBM announced. It didn't make any difference whether it was a new mainframe or a new tape drive or a new disk drive. We ordered 2 of them. No salesperson had to call. So they hired me because I had a portfolio of programs, which I had written in assembly language and in other languages at the time. And I showed it to them. And they said, could you learn IBM assembly language? And I said, well, do you have a book? So you see, there wasn't any degree of computer science that they were hiring me for. Kind of a long-winded explanation, but what I tell people today is that when you go to university, there's a curriculum that you follow that has been well thought out by bunches of people. The curriculum has been certified, typically by some agency that looks at it, says this is it. If the university is any good at all, they have a board of people, advisors that come from industry and say, this is what we need. This is how you should be putting your program together to generate the people of the future. And they publish this curriculum. You can go to their websites typically and see it. You can see the courses that you would be taking. You can see the prerequisites for those courses. And if you read that material and you learned it and you followed it on your own, then you would know all the information. You can go to forums on the web and you can talk to people and you can get answers, to the questions there, which actually is one of the things you're taught when you go to university. I keep telling people, yes, you study a curriculum, but what universities are really supposed to be teaching you is how to learn on your own, how to read, how to search, how to go through. And then this is why you never have to go back from the university. You never have to go back and say, oh, I'm going to refresh my degree, right? I'm going to do that. You don't have to do that because you learned how to learn on your own in the first place. Now, some people can't do that. Some people have to have a course. They have to have a professor. They have to be urged through to completion. University is a big change from high school, where if it didn't come out of the teacher's mouth, it basically wasn't going to be on the test. When you went to university, they said, okay, here's the book, here's the lab, come and see me in my office, and good luck. And if you look to your left and you look to your right, those people will be gone by the time you graduate. When I taught at Hartford State Technical College, we started off with 90 freshmen, and we would graduate typically 28 to 30 after 2 years, a 2-year degree. So, again, a long answer, is a university degree necessary? I don't think so. But you have to learn how to put together your portfolio. Maybe you should go out and get some jobs, what we used to call internships or cooperative education, to get the practice you need in a real-life situation of solving somebody else's problems. In the world of open source, you can also go to an open source project, take a look at their bug list, see what bugs need to be fixed, go into the source code, fix the bugs, and submit the patch. After, they may reject your patch a couple of times, say, well, it just doesn't fit in with our code. But after a while, you get the patch accepted, You learn how to make your code look like theirs. After a while, they start saying, hey, you're pretty good at this. Would you like to create some new functionality? And then eventually they say, would you like to become part of the core team? And then when you go to look for a paid job, number one, there may be a sponsor of that project that would hire you. And number two, you can get these people to give you letters of recommendation. And you have the portfolio of all the code and stuff you've done for them to show off to a potential employer. So, it's a long answer. Would I say to people, don't go to university? I think that university, if you can afford it, if you can have the time, is a good thing. But I can't say that you have to, obviously.
So Maddog, there's listening to this, I'm reminded of the kind of knowledge you have, okay, which is you start with going way back, you start with the iron and you go up through machine and assembly and then operating systems on top of that and bags of device drivers and submitting patches and all of the formalities and informalities around that. But there's a depth of knowledge you have there. And it reminds me a little bit, I'm more of an RF guy, okay? And the code I know best is Morse. And I'm thinking about, like, I drive around and look at towers and I understand how RF works. I understand antennas really well. I understand the propagation of radio waves and how those work. And antennas have disappeared. They're all inside completely integrated machines, which we hold in our hands, with hardly any knowledge of how those work, because we don't need to have it. And I'm wondering what kind of knowledge we no longer need to have as FLOSS people, okay? If we're dealing with containers, if you can program for Linux on your PC or Mac several layers up, it's not that you need this knowledge anymore, but are we losing something for not having the complete in-depth knowledge that requires going all the way down to the iron and knowing what happens at those lower levels as well?
Well, first of all, Doc, if you say the antennas have completely disappeared, I can invite you up to New Hampshire, where every place you look, there's antennas. Okay.
Yeah.
They have a slightly different use.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I will also remind you that a few years ago there was a certain CEO of a large company whose logo is a piece of fruit, who told people that they were holding their phone wrong, and that their antenna was not working properly.
Right.
So obviously somebody could have used a little bit of help with antennas back in those days. This conversation has a lot to do with a talk I give about performance. And my first job out of university was not to write new code. My job for Aetna was to take other people's programs and make them run faster. A lot of people use high-level languages, and the compilers for the high-level languages these days are fairly good. They do a lot of optimization. However, if you don't understand how the machine actually works, you can do some pretty incredibly stupid things. And this, to me, is the difference between a coder and somebody who does computer science. A coder can write a program, it will work. Somebody who understands computer science and algorithms and the way the machine actually works can write a program that will work and will work efficiently. So people say, "Oop, I'm frozen. I will unfreeze me." People will say, "What difference does it make? Everything's in containers. Everything is so isolated from the actual hardware." But it's not. If you take a look at the way that containers work, even a virtual machine, most of the time the actual code being written is operating on the hardware itself. It's only when you start to do something which the operating system would do, a privileged instruction, a privileged type of thing, does that flip into any type of emulation. And most of the time, it's not true emulation. It's more like simulation. So it still is using the native part of the machine. And if you're doing that, then how you hold your data and, in what format is very important. And you might be able to get 5 or 10% better performance out of it. And people go, oh, 5 or 10%, who cares? Well, 10% better performance might mean that Google, instead of having to buy 10,000 servers, only has to buy 9,000 servers. Instead of using 1 billion watts of electricity, they only have to use 900,000 watts of electricity. This thing called a cell phone, instead of running for only 9 hours, now can run for 10 hours. It doesn't get hot to your hand. There's lots of other things. And this is performance. We used to measure performance by how fast the program would run when you had your system plugged into the wall. Now we measure it on how long your battery lasts. So understanding these types of things at the level you were talking about is very important. Do I recommend that people write in assembly language? No. I did that for 7 years of my life. I would never recommend that to anybody today. However, I would recommend understanding how some assembly language works, even a very simple one, because that teaches you how the machine works itself. And that knowledge can help you to write a better program. It's not that you spend a lot of time doing it. After a while, it's just automatic in your mind. It's just something you just naturally think about. How do I hold my data? And how do I organize my data so that more of it is staying in cache, more of it is staying in the memory? You're staying as far away as possible from the slow speed devices. So, now, do you need to know all this stuff at once? No. I mean, this is something you can pick up over time, but I do recommend that you spend some time in picking up this knowledge.
I have so I don't know if this follows from that or not, but it's an interesting thing. When we were talking in a kind of our prep conversation, I was surprised to find that as active as you've been in the open source movement, you've developed more of an affection for the free software movement that predated it and is still very much with us. And I wondered if you could give us a few words on that, on what the differences between free software and open source are and how they differently apply.
Okay. So first of all, again, a slight correction. I'm going to go back to 1969, where we didn't talk about open source software or closed source software or free software or anything like that. What we talked about was just software. And most of the software was distributed in source code form. The reason for that was that there wasn't enough of any type of one machine, one OS, one architecture, to really make it worthwhile to create binary-only code. So you would get your application delivered to you in one form or another in source code. The way you protected your intellectual property was with a contract. And the contract said what you could or could not do with that code. So, I take a look at binary-only code as a new kid on the block. That before that, we had everything was open source. So it meant that you could change the code if you had to. You could apply your own fix, your own patch. You could, if the code didn't work, you could fix it. And if you didn't have the expertise to fix it, you could hire somebody who had the expertise to fix it. At Aetna, we got all the source code for everything we ever bought. And and one of the reasons why that we were just so big and had so much money that we could force the issue. But it was that way a lot of places back then. And that was also the time where you could not protect your code with copyright or patents. They hadn't been applied to software yet. That didn't happen until the mid 1980s. So that's where that came from. Now, what is what we call open source? Open source benefits the developer. You're going along, you see a piece of code, you see something that said, gee, that's I really would like to do that. I would really like to create a product out of that. But how do I reach the person who created that in the first place? And how do I get their permission to do that? Because after all, it has a copyright on it. The very fact that somebody has written the code means it belongs to somebody in some type of copyright. So you need a license that says, okay, go ahead and use this. And when you do use it, these are the terms and conditions of what you have to do. So MIT and Bsd are both looked at as very permissive open source licenses, that all you really have to do is tell people where it came from and so forth and so on. You can use it, you can create your own distribution, and you do not have to distribute the source code. You do not have to make the source code available, and you can even change it so it's no longer the pure MIT or Bsd code, and you don't have to distribute your changes either. Now, this is great for the developer. It means that they don't have to find lawyers to get permission. They don't have to pay a license fee. They don't have to, all these things. But it doesn't do anything for the end user, really. The end user that gets that product is still just binary. They can't change it. They can't fix it. And sooner or later, when you lose interest in it, it may be gone forever. That thing that they bought, the piece of hardware or anything, is now unusable. Free software, on the other hand, says, okay, same thing as a permissive license. You can get it, you can use it, but there's a very strict set of rules that you have to follow in order to be able to distribute your binaries. And those rules say you have to make your source code available. You have to have to tell people how to build it. You have to give them the ability to fix their own problems or to make their own changes. And that is the biggest difference between open source licenses and what we call free software licenses, mostly the GPL.
I was looking as you were talking about kind of the history of open source licenses and all this stuff. I was looking for, I know I've got a picture of us somewhere, John, at a conference. I believe it was called, I don't know if they still do it. It was called Fizzly down in Portland. Yes. We were both down there, I think, maybe 2009 or 2010. And I just remember it was very surreal because I remember sitting, I think we were both speakers. You were very popular. All the students were coming up and talking to you because it seemed like mostly a student conference. And we were sitting there in the green room, and I think you were there, I don't know, but it was very surreal because I was there, you were there, Richard Stallman was there. Peter Sund was there. If people don't know who Peter Sund is, he was one of the founders of the Pirate Bay, right? And I remember looking over, and here's Richard Stallman of Free Software Foundation and Peter Sund having this conversation, and you've got someone who arguably has argued for free software for very long time, and then you've got another younger person at that point who was was some would say giving away copyrighted software, right? I mean, he wasn't, but it was shared basically there on his network. And I said, this is such a weird thing. And then on top of that, you had Lula da Silva, at that point, the president of Brazil, coming and talking. And it was such an interesting time. And I had kind of forgotten about that until we started talking about this issue around licenses and stuff. It was just such a cool experience. So I know that you have or at least at that point, you had a connection to Brazil. Are you still working in Brazil? Are you still passionate about that? What are you doing there?
Oh, yes. Well, I started going to Brazil in 1995. I'd actually been to Caracas, Venezuela in 1994 at a DICAS event. And I went to another event in Brazil in 1995. I think it was a DICAS. It could have been some type of free software event by that time. And I became involved with the University of Sao Paulo. Now, a lot of people, when they think of Brazil, they think of the rainforest, they think of soccer, they think of the Amazon River and all that type of stuff. But what they don't think of is that Sao Paulo is the second largest city in the Western Hemisphere after only Mexico City, with New York City being far down the line. So they don't think about the fact that the University of Sao Paulo has 100,000 students and 16,000 PhDs. And it was at the University of Sao Paulo at that time that I saw my first Beowulf supercomputer in real life. And they were doing very interesting work with it. And they were also very much into free software, the GNU Linux system, mostly because of a guy in government by the name of Marcus Mazzoni. And Marcus had done some projects for the government, and he brought them in on time and under budget. Now, in Brazil, those two words are impossible to say. Nothing is on time and under budget, okay? And the government was so astounded by this that they gave him another project, and it too came in on time and under budget. They finally said, well, how are you doing this? I go, I'm using free software. And this got so much attention from the government that he was able to do this thing, that they started to promote him, and there was more projects being done. And they developed these series of very large events, one of which was Feastly, as you mentioned, in Porto Alegre, and another was called Latinoware in Foz do Iguaçu. They have smaller events throughout. And last year, Debian organization had their DebConf, their main event, DebConf, in Curitiba, Brazil. I still do work down there. I have two major projects that I'm working on right now, one of which is called Caninos Loucos. It is a project to create a single board computer system, kind of like the Raspberry Pi, but have it designed and manufactured in Brazil. The reason for that is that due to customs duties and shipping and a bunch of other things, the Raspberry Pi that costs $35 in the United States has a street price of $150 in Brazil. And they are also hard to get. So by manufacturing them in Brazil, we can both cut the costs and make the availability much higher so that you can actually use them to do real life projects in industry and business. The second project is called Project Cauã. And Project Cauã, to simplify it, is a project to allow university students to be able to afford to go to university. Universities, federal and state universities in Latin America, for the most part, are tuition free. Qualified students who study hard and take the tests and get in can go tuition free. However, 40% of the students who qualify still cannot take advantage of it because their parents don't have the money to pay for the apartment, the food, the computers, the internet, the books, and everything else they need. So Project Cauã would allow the students to work part-time, about 24 hours a week, doing work that they want to do. And that work is working with small business people to be able to help them take care of their computers. So if you have a very small business person, they may have 1, 2, or 3 computers in their business. They can't afford a full-time systems administrator. The student could come along and make sure their systems are kept up to date, the right patches applied, help them install new hardware and software, help them set up wireless access points, make sure they're secure, all those types of things, of which the small business person would pay them a small amount of money every month. So this is the project. We're just starting into pilot with this now. We're hoping to pilot this both in Argentina and in Brazil. The other thing is that the program teaches the student how to run their own business, how to keep inventory, how to run a customer relationship management system, how to do a lot of things that they can use as skills after they get out of university. We actually want to start them doing this type of work back in high school, and by the time they get to university, they would be ready to go. So that's Project Cauã. Those are the two projects I'm working on right now. Other than LPI, I'm mostly retired at this point. I'll be 70 years old in August. But as I've told people for years, I mean, I do this, right? It doesn't take a huge amount of physical effort to do that. And I can do that until I'm senile. And then when I'm senile, I really don't care anymore. I'm somebody else's problem.
That really sounds like an interesting project and fits well with everything else that you're doing. I'm just curious if people want to get involved. Like, let's say it seems like maybe a good opportunity. I'm talking about Project Cauã now. It seems like it might be a good opportunity for businesses, larger businesses that want to support this type of activity to get involved with. It seems like something that we might have wanted to get involved with when I used to work for Sun. They would often get involved in projects like that. I'm just kind of curious, what is the project looking for, and how can people get involved if they want to help out?
The project is actually on 3 levels. One is an international level. That is, it's basically the same in any country you go into. And that is the basic philosophy of the project. I had an opportunity to create an organization that would have millions of young people belonging to it. But the problem is when you do that, it becomes a little awkward, particularly in some countries that fear large organizations. So instead, the project has been created so that each student owns their own company. They're completely independent. And the only thing that Project Cauã does is give them the tools that allow them to run their own company. That's at the utmost level. It's the way it is every place. Then there's a middle level, which changes according to the country and the culture. So there will be a middle level, which will be in different languages according to the country. And also you have to think about what's legal in each one of these countries. So the basis of Project Cauã is that the student creates a contract with the small business owner that says, okay, this is what I'm going to do for you. This is how much you're going to pay me every month. This is when I come to you. This is, when I do the work, how much work I'm going to do. And the student signs that with the customer. So that's the same every country, because different country laws. And then you have advertising materials that the student can pull down, print it off on their printer, fill in their name, their telephone contact information, things like that. And that's also on a country by country level. Then the level below that is on an individual local level, because we would like to have mentors, people from industry, volunteering their time to work with the students to help them over the types of things that some students have. You may remember your first time going out to look for a job. You were probably more than a little nervous. You, as a high school student, unless you were exceptional, you probably sat there and said, I don't know anything. I can't possibly help this business person with anything. So what we do at that level is we work with the students to say, okay, what do you do at home? Can you change a disk? Can you install a new operating system? Can you do this? Oh, yes, I can do that. I can do that. Well, guess what? The business person can't. That's not what they know how to do. They are there to run their business. And so they'll pay you to do these things. But the students are still a little bit shy, a little bit, I can't do this. And the mentor helps them through that. So, what can we do in the United States as an example? I'm working with a campus party, an event in Detroit. We could start this up and we could have a U.S. middle level because contracts are mostly the same to the Universal Commercial Code across all states. Do some advertising materials and then have some local mentors in the area of, say, Detroit, where we could go out and find students who want to go to university, but they need a little bit of extra money to help them live. So we could do that. We could do that in other places too. So, I need to get it started up. We have the first part of the website mostly done, the upper level. The middle level is pretty much done for Brazil. We're working on something for Argentina. If we get stuff for Argentina, of course, that's Spanish, so we'd be able to spread out to a lot of Spanish-speaking areas. But then you can say, okay, I'm going to hit southern part of the United States, the Hispanic community there, help them get started and, and create it that way. The interesting thing about Project Cauã is that you can use at least 3/4 of the materials without even having to sign into the website. If you want to pull down the contract and use it, fine. If you want to pull down the advertising material and use it, fine. If you want to, do all that. If you want to communicate with people on the website, we ask that you obey a code of conduct and then create a login. And the reason for that is we want people to be civil on this site. We don't want people to put other people down. We don't want people to call them stupid. We don't want the people, if you start doing that, you'll find your login taken away. But you still don't have to pay any money. And then the final thing, in order to use the Project Cauã logo and the Project Cauã name as a brand of the services, you have to also go into a professional code of conduct that says that you will not steal from your customer. You will not, do all these things that, and we may be able to then give you or sell you professional insurance to protect you from mistakes or health care type of insurance or things like that. So, but in all these levels, the student hasn't paid anything to Project Cauã. We have other ways of getting financing for that.
That's really interesting. And for those that are looking for more information, because the language can be an issue, and we had this asked in the chat actually, it's projectcauã.org, yes. And you spell Cauã C-A-U-A, right? C-A-U-A. Yes. So projectcauã.org if people want to get involved. It would be, and we have a lot of comments actually saying this would be great everywhere. We should do this in the U.S. and blah, blah, blah. So I think there's a lot of support for this, and I applaud your work in this area. I do want to ask you quickly, because we're running out of time, another question that came up in the chat. But by the way, for those listening, we always try to take questions in the chat. So please join if you're able to when we're doing this live, and we'll try to get your questions in. I know this may be a long answer. We're running out of time, and so I guess I'm going to ask you to keep the answer as short as you can with still giving the details. Something we may have probably asked at the beginning and we didn't, which is the Maddog question. Why Maddog? And I think I know the answer here, but it came up. So is there a way to answer that without going too long, John? I don't know.
Yes. Let's just say that you're looking at a person who's close to 70 years old, and over a long period of time, he learned that when you lose your temper, you lose the argument. And I have found over that time that it is actually better for me to make other people lose their temper, because then they lose the argument. So I was about 27 years old when I realized that showing my anger, that just made me lose the argument, maybe lose the discussion. And I have learned how to keep myself, but I keep the name to remind me every single day, every single hour, every single moment, not to lose my temper. I still have the temper.
That's interesting. Because I think, it's sort of like when a very large person is called tiny. You get these nicknames. It seems to me like it's always seemed to me, knowing you, that Maddog is like one of the least appropriate possible names for you, and therefore interesting. So we always have 3 questions that we end the show with, and the first one is, what questions have you not been asked that you'd like to have been asked? And if you could keep it brief, it'd be awesome.
Well, one question I would like to be asked was, Maddog, would you be willing to come back again sometime?
And I have an answer. The answer, of course, yes. Yeah, we'd love to have you back.
Thank you, Don.
So the second question is, what are your favorite text editing and scripting languages? You must have some.
Well, Vim is my favorite text editor. Before that was VI. Before that it was EX. Before that it was ED. And before that it was punch cards.
It was never Emacs, huh?
No, never Emacs. I'm sorry, Richard.
Yeah, and the third one is, do you have anything to say about blockchain? Because blockchain is just sort of our control question. We ask it of everybody.
I think blockchain is very important, but not for the investor, not for the Bitcoin type of person who just wants to see Bitcoin go up. I think the blockchain would have immense value to the business world if people just took it seriously and used it as a medium of exchange. So I would say, do not keep your coins, hidden away. They don't do anybody any good that way. Keep moving them around. Keep buying and selling things using blockchain and, cryptocurrencies. So I hope that answered your question.
It does. It's interesting because most of the conversations I'm in are around blockchain as just simply a distributed ledger and nothing to do with currencies. And that just makes it another way of doing a database, which is, yes. And there it's, one of the arguments is whether or not data is more easily correlatable or something like that. There are a lot of arguments around that, like with having to do with identity, that if you're managing your own identity and you're keeping your exchanges or your records of that in a blockchain, it's in fact in one database that's in many places rather than in one central vulnerable location. But is it more vulnerable because it's in many places? That's one of the many arguments there.
I think if we start using blockchain more for currency distribution and stuff, we might find a lot of corruption would disappear, because it would be very much more traceable as to where the money was going and stuff and where it came from.
Yeah, that's cool. So we're at an hour, and I really appreciate this, and we will have you back. It was really great having you, John, or Maddog as you prefer. The man, I've never seen Mad, so he doesn't live to his name. So thanks so much for being with us. It's been a great show.
Okay, thank you.
So Aaron, so what do you think having after this hour?
It's great to see John again and hear from him and see that he's still passionate, that Project Cauã is still ongoing. I think it says a lot to say that you are investing your time into, both LPI, Project Cauã, they are aiming to educate people, right? And find ways not just to educate them about technology, but to improve their lives. And so I think that's really admirable and very, very cool. I will say, going back to a question around does the does that bare metal matter anymore? Do I need to know about that? The interesting thing, I didn't want to bring it up during the call because I don't want to make it too much of a commercial for the company I work at, Sysdig, but I mean, that's kind of why one of the reasons we exist is to surface those low-level system calls for people, because it does matter, right? Like that's kind of like a single source of truth, or the ultimate source of truth, is even though you're running virtually or on a container, there is at the bottom of it a kernel there, a Linux kernel, and it's doing a lot of work. And that's where a lot of information can be helpful, especially when you're obfuscating some of what's going on by using containers or VMs and things like that. So in one way, it's becoming even more important to know that, but it's becoming more difficult to know some of that stuff because you may be a system admin, but you are working very virtually as opposed to physically anymore. So we're coming up with ways to solve that problem. So it's just kind of interesting. The whole conversation, I'm very nostalgic, so I appreciate the whole conversation going back to the roots of all of this stuff and why it's important. I think that there's still a lot of great lessons to be learned from that discussion. So, yeah, great to talk to Maddog once again.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me about it is, and it occurred to me in the course of the conversation that, and of course we're both, I mean, I'm actually almost 3 years older than Maddog. He's still coming up to retirement. I can't even imagine stopping doing anything. That would, sooner or later it happens to all of us. But it's just that how committed he's been in the long term to some long term things. When he was with Linux International, he was there for quite a while. He's been on the Professional Institute for a long time. He's been involved with Project Cauã for a long time. I've had a number of conversations with him about that, and he's been on the case. It occurred to me, I've done the same thing, and part of that is is modeled on my own experience with Linux Journal. I mean, Linux Journal was a 26-year project, really, and it's not over because we're still trying to preserve the website with archives that go back forever and keeping that domain name alive. But Customer Commons, we'll go to our plugs here. I'll do mine first. customercommons.org. Something I started in 2012. I think we're finally ready to take off now. It's 8 years later. Project VRM at Harvard's Berkman Center, which has started in 2006. Doesn't seem that long ago to me, but that's 14 years ago, and we've been on this case for 14 years. Still a very active list involved in that. So just the long term, and the staying phlegmatic about it, just being the train that it isn't the little engine that could. It's the little engine that never stops and becomes a big engine. It just rolls along regardless. Is oblivious to short-term concerns. Is kind of interesting that way. So so I've done my plug. What's your plug there?
In this day and age where we're at right now with COVID, there's not a lot of events going on, which is what I usually plug. Of course, you can go take a look at my book, Linux for Makers. If you've bought the book, here's what I would say. If you've bought Linux for Makers and you'd like to see changes or you have some suggestions, let me know if you can get a hold of me. I think you can because I'm on all the social networks and whatnot. Just drop me a line, connect with me. Let me know if you have any suggestions, and because I'm working on a second edition, so I want to update the book. There's been some changes around Raspberry Pi that I want to surface. So if you have any suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, from an events perspective, there is KubeCon coming up in the fall. I'll probably be in the Sysdig virtual booth. So if you want to stop in the virtual booth and say hi, sounds weird to say, but if you want to do that, please do. I'd be happy to chat with you there. But otherwise, there's not a whole lot else going on to plug, I don't think. So that's about it for me.
So you have something on the screen here, but not everybody's who are watching the screen. So where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm Aaron Newcomb on all the networks. So Facebook, facebook.com/Aaron Newcomb. Twitter is probably the best way for something like a suggestion like this to reach out to me, because anybody can do it. I don't have to be a friend or anything. You can just send me a message on Twitter. So let's do it that way. Twitter.com/Aaron Newcomb, and that'll be the best way. If you have the book, you want to do a suggestion, let's do it that way. That'll be nice and easy.
Cool. So, and I'm D Searls at D Searls on Twitter. So, if you want to reach me that way, this is the point where I'd plug next week's show. We are going to have a show next week. We're still settling out who's going to be on it exactly. So I'm not going to commit it to permanence at this point, but I guarantee it will be interesting. So thanks so much. What's that? Sorry. Oh yeah, and we're starting early next week. So tune in at 8:30. I'm the voice in my head is telling me we're going to start at 8:30 next week. That's 8:30 Pacific time. Specific time in the Pacific time next week. So thanks so much, everybody, and we will see and hear you and watch your chat next week. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jason Howell, host of All About Android, where each week I'm joined by Ron Richards, Florence Ion, and a rotating crew of Android journalists, developers, and enthusiasts, where we talk about the latest news, hardware, and apps for the Android faithful. You can subscribe by going to twit.tv/AAA or find the show in your podcatcher of choice. That's All About Android.